So last night is my local gaming store's draft. We're doing Ravnica drafts right now. This is the deck I ended up with here. I ended up playing Boros. Pack 1, pick 1 last night was Light of the Legion. A 5/5 flying mentoring angel for 6 that if it dies, you get a +1/+1 counter on each white creature you control. I first picked this because the pack was pretty garbage. I don't even remember what my second option was. It was just, I was looking at that pack and being like, wow, I don't want any of these cards. And I'm like, well, maybe a 5/5 Flying Dragon's good enough. I can use this as the top end of a Boros deck. Not particularly exciting top end of a Boros deck, but it is a evasive creature that does a ton of damage. So I'm like, all right, or it could also be fine in Selesnya. So I grabbed this. I'm like, okay, not my favorite pick because it's not a great card in Boros, and I don't like Selesnya. So it wasn't an exciting pick, but it was better than nothing. The next pack, the best card in it by far was Truefire Captain. And I'm like, okay, so I'll pick that up. A little bit of a push again towards Boros.
Our modest fellowship expands. Praise the sub.
Welcome, Boils1111. Thanks for the sub. Welcome to the channel. And then my third pack came around. The third pack opened up. And also, I can't remember what was in there, but total garbage, right? And then there's a Swath Cutter Giant in there. And I'm like, man, I never get to play this card. This card is a Selesnya card that has been unfortunately misprinted. Instead of having 1 white, 1 green, 4 others, and Convoke, it has Vigilance and a red mana symbol. So I'm like, mid-range Boros is not a thing in this format. It isn't. Boros is aggro to the death, claw for every point of damage. But I'm like, I'm gonna play mid-range Boros. I never get to play with Swath Cutter Giants. The card's super cool. It's not great, but it's super cool. I've got a Light of the Legion. I've got a Truefire Captain. I'm like, I'm going fucking mid-range Boros. So we had 14 people draft last night at our local gaming store. So there was a pot of 8 and a pot of 6, which seems insane to me, but that's the way they broke it down. And in my pod of 8, there were 3 people playing drafting Boros. So I wasn't solidly in that color yet. I could still splash red. I could do Selesnya splashing red and just throw away the Truefire Captains. That's certainly possible. Although the person to my left, immediate left, ended up drafting Selesnya. But I did very soon after that pick up 2 Guild Mages in 2 packs. Like I think this was my pack 2 pick 1, and then I immediately got past the Guild Mage as well. So at that point I was pretty heavily into Boros. My 3-drops were a real problem for me. I just did not get good 3-drops. I think the gentleman 2 to my left or 3 to my left who was drafting Boros was cutting pretty hard on some of the low drop creatures for Boros. So this deck ended up light on combat tricks. The same guy who I was just talking about drafted 2 Sure Strikes, 2 Righteous Blows, and 1 other combat trick of which I don't remember. So I didn't get a lot of the cheap combat tricks that I would have liked. Did end up with 2 Swath Cutter Giants, 2 Truefire Captains. I ended up playing a Hammer Dropper because it just felt like it fit the theme. I almost played 2 Hammer Droppers. I'll tell you about that in a minute. So we'll walk through the deck. Healer's Hawk, great card, overperformed the entire draft. I drew this on turn 1 3 times out of 7 games. So that was pretty good. Hunted Witness. I don't think I used this card. I think I drew it maybe once. It was one of the primary cards that I sideboarded out. Anytime I was on the draw, I pretty much took Hunted Witness out of my deck. Skyline Scout, pretty typical, maybe a little bit worse in this deck. Normally Boros really likes this card because this card is a 2/1 creature for 2, which is fine. That is easy to mentor onto and can go evasive for paying mana, which lets you sink your mana, which is great. The problem with the Skyline Scout for this deck in particular is I have a lot of other mana sinks. I want to use my Guild Mages. My creatures are very expensive. My removal is very expensive. So there's a lot of there are a number of times in this across the course of the night where I just wasn't able to activate his ability when I wanted to because it was the difference of did I pass the turn having only done 2 damage or did I develop a very expensive creature. So that was a bit of a problem. Ornery Goblin, I only saw this dude once. He's a really good 2-drop. He almost always trades up. He basically represents a 3/1 in terms of combat stats, and he also can't be blocked or blocked by... he can block for free or can't be blocked by 1/1. So some of the creatures that people use to trade to slow Boros down, like Hired Poisoners or Burglar Rats, can't deal with Ornery Goblin. He's pretty good. I drew him once. In the game I drew him, my opponent... I drew him and played... I was going second. My opponent on turn 2 played a Chamber Sentry, which is the... I can show you that guy because probably some of you don't know what that card does. This dude here. and played it as a 2/2. It's basically a slower, more expensive walking ballista. And that was my turn to play was Ornery Goblin, which just got totally countered, and I never drew him again the entire draft, so underperformed, I guess. The Legion Guild Mages were good as 2-drops, good as mana sinks. I never got to tap a creature with Legion Guild Mage, but I did get to win a game using the tap 6, deal 3 damage to a player. I'll talk about that in a little bit. So Guild Mages were good, but not amazing. But I need 2-drops, I need Curve, and that's what they're supposed to be, just a very, very flexible card. This card's incredible for Boros, and it's better for lower Boros, but it's for low down to the ground Boros, because it's a really good mana sink that does a ton of things that Boros wants, but it's a really, really good card. Fresh Race Recruit was fine. Didn't outperform, didn't underperform, did what it's supposed to do, which is get a mentor counter on it and become a really annoying first striker that attacks every turn. Totally valid card. Blade Instructors, I don't like this card, but I needed 3 drops. I picked these up. At some point I go, well, I've got a good set of 2s. I'd like a little bit more in 2s, but maybe not. But I have no 3s. I need to draft some 3s. So I picked up a couple of these. Their redeeming features, they mentor. They basically can only attack once. They always get blocked. They always die. They did okay. Not great. I wish I'd had better quality 3-drops. I'll talk about that in a minute. I got a little punished by playing these, but that's okay. Wojak Bodyguard, fine if you have enough creatures. If you ever get into a position where opponents are removing your creatures and you just can't get enough, this card becomes a dead card. It's okay. I think it performed fine across the course of the night. It wasn't great, wasn't bad. There was at least one time where I couldn't attack because I had a Wojak Bodyguard only, and I would have liked to attack. But at the same time, there was a number of times where the Bodyguard was better than the Blade Instructor in the same situation because of the 3 toughness. So not upset by that draft, but one of these double-edged swords, which is kind of nice in a card, honestly. 1 Luminous Bonds as removal is cheap removal. This was good. I wish I'd drawn it more often. Totally valid. Boros Locket. I normally don't play Lockets in Boros decks. I think Boros Locket's the Locket that I'm least excited to play. But I was really worried about my mana curve with so many heavy things at the end of my mana curve, and then having to run the lands to support that, and then wanting to have something to do with the lands for mid-game for getting cards. So I don't regret running the Boros Locket. It was fine. I cracked it once. I lost the game that I cracked it in, but so what? I didn't see it the rest of the time, the rest of the night. Parhelion Patrols overperformed. My sideboard over here, I had another Hammer Dropper and an Intrusive Pack Beast that I was considering playing. The decision for me in the end was between Parhelion Patrol number 2 and Hammer Dropper number 2. I don't love Parhelion Patrol. I think in a low down to the ground Boros deck, this is pretty good. The 2/3 flying Vigilant Mentor is great for 4 as a flyer. But in this deck, I expected to have to go through the ground because I had a bunch of slow big dudes, and I wasn't sure the Parhelion Patrol was going to fit that. If you look in this deck too, there's only 2 cards in the entire deck they can mentor, although they can be mentored onto by a lot of my other creatures. So I wasn't sure about the inclusion of these. These actually outperformed again, and the situations where they outperformed were if I had drawn a Hammer Dropper, I would have been fucked, and drawing the Patrol let me win the game style stuff, so I'm pretty pleased about that. I'll talk about that in a little bit. Hammer Dropper, I think I drew him once and he was removed. So I don't think he had much impact either way. The Truefire Captains, which I was super excited about, a 4/3 mentoring creature who deals damage if they try to remove it, or if they try to block it or remove it with damage-based stuff, seems amazing. I have a bunch of creatures this can mentor onto. I resolved a Truefire Captain once, all night long, across 7 games, and I had 2 of them in my deck. And the time I got it resolved, it got Artful Takedown, so it did nothing. Never got to attack. It didn't do any damage. I might as well not have had this card in my deck. And this is the card that pushed me into Boros on pick 2, and then getting another one very soon afterwards. So I'm a little annoyed about that, because this card is, this feels like, this is either like the top end of aggressive Boros or like right in the middle of mid-range Boros. Not that mid-range Boros is a thing. And I'm like, man, I got 2 of them. This is going to be great. And no, didn't do shit with that. The Punch didn't start my deck. I put this in after game 1. I just felt like I needed, it wasn't reach really. It just has synergy with all my high toughness, high power creatures. I've got a 5 power, a 4 power. So I have 4 5 power toughness, 4 power creatures. That was hard to say. And 2 4 power creatures, right? So 4 5 power creatures and 2 4 power creatures. Those are the words we're trying to use. And it just was kind of like a finisher thing for me. I think initially I had in a, and what did I have in? Don't remember. I might have had the Haas the Marshal in originally. I don't love Haas the Marshal, and I just needed something else for this. So this card ended up being okay. It won me a game that I think I was already winning once, and I think that was it. But it was it was there. It was a little bit better, I think, than the other option. To Command the Storms, I don't like this card, particularly in Boros. It's a little bit slow. It's 5 damage removal is pretty good. But 5 mana is a little bit clunky. It's a little bit hard to cast this and do anything else. So a lot of times creatures you want to remove them cheaply and still get in. Things like Combat Tricks or Demotion would probably do a better job of that than Command the Storm. But I didn't have very much in removal when these were offered, and I was like, I'm mid-range anyways. I'm probably playing enough lands that I'll be able to play these regularly. They were good when I drew them, but clunky to use. There were a couple of scenarios where I had to make the decision of, do I want to remove the creature or do I want to develop board? So that was a little bit painful. Then Light of the Legion, I played this creature a number of times. I never got a +1/+1 counter from it dying. It was never able to die with another creature on the board. I don't think it won me any games, and I definitely lost 2 games where I had this developed. And I think I only mentored once with it all night long. So overall, 6/4, 5/5 flying creature that has no other text on it is fairly mediocre. Did okay, but not great. It's not a great card. We know this. It was fun to play with it because you never get to play with this card because it's a pile of shit and you're never going to use it in most stuff, right? But I got to use it. I got to play mid-range Boros. And then finally, the card I was most excited about all night long, Swathcutter Giant. I got to play this a number of times on the board. I'm going to tell you guys about a game for Swathcutter Giant that redeemed this entire deck experience for me. All right, so that's the cards in the deck. The sideboard had a little bit of stuff. I think oh, that's what it was. It wasn't Haz the Marshal. I started with Maniacal Rage in the deck, and I pulled Maniacal Rage for Gravitic Punch. I'm okay with that decision. I'm not sure it mattered one way or the other, quite honestly. Collar the Culprit came in a lot. Mostly I dropped Hunted Witness for Collar the Culprit anytime that I was playing against decks that had a number of 4+ toughness creatures. Crush Contraband came in once to try to deal with Misinformation Campaign. And then nothing else got subbed in here. I made the decision not to play Pack Beast. It feels like this is very good as a curve topper in an aggressive Boros deck and a little bit less good in a deck that has a number of big creatures that are trying to push through on the ground anyways. And Flight of Equinaughts, I drafted it like second to last or something, and I didn't really tend to play it. Although I did at one point think about changing the deck to be totally thematic with just big white, red, dumb dudes who are in there just hitting things, and kind of fits that. But didn't quite get there. All right, the deck I lost in the first round, which is really bad news. I played against the Dimir deck, piloted by a friend of mine who I think is a very good player. His Dimir deck was decent, but not amazing. It did have 2 Disinformation Campaigns and a lot of removal, double Hypothesizal, double Artful Takedown, something else. I think double Deadweight and something else. So those were both very close games, very long games. The first of those games was when I got Chamber Sentry'd on turn 2, and my hand was Skyland Scout and Ornery Goblin into like I think some 4-drops or maybe even a 5-drop at that point. And the Sentry just like kills both of those without doing anything, just shut down my aggro entirely, which was pretty painful. And that deck, that game ground out a little bit. I fed him like 4 lands to that Disinformation Campaign, but it eventually ground me out. Killing me very, very slowly with like 1/4s, I think, for that guy's ton of removal. Yeah, it was Dimir with splashing red for removal. And then the second game versus him, I kept a hand it was Command the Storm, Swathcutter Giant, Light of the Legion, and like 4 lands or something. And the thought process of keeping that land, I think he mulliganed 1 on that, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to keep this. I'm going to draw stuff. I mean, that's my entire top of my curve. I'm going to draw stuff that'll lower mana cost, and I'm going to have some plays, and then I'm going to have the late game that's probably going to win me the game. And what I instead drew was I drew plains. So my first 4 draws and a hand I kept with 4 lands and 2 6-drops and a 5-drop removal was 4 land in a row. My first play that game, I'm not even joking, my first play as a Boros deck that game was Swathcutter Giant on 6. It was a close game, but not that close. So I lost in the first round to that deck. The second round opponent, I matched up against a Selesnya opponent, playing, it looked like fairly weak Selesnya. It didn't look like he drafted all that many good cards, and I just beat him down with better value creatures. Swathcutter Giant did win me a game versus him. It killed 2 1/1 lifelink tokens for free, and I was super, super excited about that. So but the games were pretty uninteresting with that. Honestly, he had a little bit of early game, but not a lot of pressure. I had a little bit of early game, and then my bigger creatures in the end just overrun him. And then the third round was the most interesting round to play. I was playing against another Dimir deck. So okay, here's the other thing, right? If you think about the way that the decks are supposed to work, aggro is supposed to beat control is supposed to beat mid range, and mid range is supposed to beat aggro, right? That's your cycle. That my first round matchup was versus control. My second round matchup was versus another mid range deck, and my third round matchup was versus a control deck. Because I played another Dimir deck after that for round 3, which is a little bit unfortunate because I think. Well, anyways, but it doesn't matter. That was by far the most interesting. So game 1, I'm gonna sketch out a game. You'll have to do theater of the mind with this. I was trying to think about how I could like animate this or like do this with cards, and maybe I can do it up in here, but it was a little bit difficult to draft. But I remember this game. This game is really, really cool. All right, so my opponent mulligans to 6, and I'm going first. My hand is a little clunky. It's 3 or 4 lands. A Blade Instructor, a Wojak Bodyguard, and then like I think it's a Swath Cutter Giant in my hand. So my turn, it's like it's land pass. His turn, land pass. My turn, land pass. His turn, land Wall of Mist. You guys familiar with these? What Wall of Mist doesn't show up in my searching? Oh, because it's selected by some stupid colors. All right. So he's immediately 0-5 defender. My turn is Blade Instructor. His turn is casts the Centipede, the Spinal Centipede. My turn is land, 4th land, and Wojak Bodyguard. So I now have a 3-1 and a 3-3 on the board. His turn is play out Nightveil Predator on 4 with the Wall of Mist and the Centipede, and attack with the Centipede. So I have the decision there of, do I want to... I'm now on a clock. There's a 3-3 flyer. He's got the board stabilized. I have no threats on. I mean, I've got 2 3-3s on the board, but he's got a 0-5 wall and a 3-2 Centipede there. And he's just attacked me with the Centipede. So my decisions are, do I want to put a counter on the Nightveil Predator to make it a 4-4, or do I want to start taking 3 from that Centipede? Neither of which are great. So I trade off with the Centipede. He kills my Blade Instructor, which means the Wojak Bodyguard can't attack. Puts a counter on the Nightveil Predator for next turn. My turn is like untap. This is now turn 5 for me. I have 5 lands. I don't have another card to play besides Command the Storm or Swath Cutter Giant. So I decide on my turn, I Command the Storm his Wall of Mist for my full turn. So his board is now just Nightveil Predator. His turn, he untaps with his 4-4 Nightveil Predator and plays a Watcher in the Mist. So this dude here. And hits me for 4 with the Nightveil Predator, bringing me to 16. My turn, I untap and play a Swath Cutter Giant. My draw in the meantime has been a Luminous Bonds. So my option now is, do I Swath Cutter or Luminous Bonds the Watcher in the Mist? His play on his turn, he plays out a Pitiless Gorgon. This dude here. And a Whispering Snitch. This dude here. And I think it was, maybe the Snitch wasn't there. I can't remember if the Snitch was there or not. It gets a little fuzzy there. But he plays out a Pitiless Gorgon. And then gets in for, 7. So I was at 16. I take 7. I go down to 9. He's got a 4-4 fucking flying hexproof vampire on the board. And a 3-4 flying Watcher. My turn, I untap and bond. I've drawn Parhelion Patrol. I've got 7 lands in play now. I Parhelion Patrol and then bond the Gorgon. Attack with the Swath Cutter Giant. Put my opponent down and the Wojak Bodyguard. Put my opponent down to I think 12 at that point. And now have a creature in the air. My opponent on his turn untaps. So he's got the option now. So I guess describing this in detail is useful if you can picture what I'm doing. But if you're just listening, you're probably like, what the fuck is Filthy talking about? Why does he keep going on about this? So the scenario of events are basically, I'm going to lose to this vampire with any amount of time. I have nothing in my deck that stands up to it except the Light of the Legion. Nothing else can interact with that vampire whatsoever to deal with it. And his plays 2, 3, 4, 5 on curve were nuts, right? So like super strong with this. And my only option for winning this was as much tempo as I possibly could do. Like, you got to think about this. He's got a 3/4 Watcher and a 4/4 Vampire on the board, and I have no air blockers in play right there. Like, the decision to Luminous Bonds the Gorgon is such an aggressive decision. The same with the turn where I'm at 5 mana and he's just got a Wall of Mist on the board. The decision to Command the Storm the Wall of Mist was so irrelevant. And I end up stealing that game by 1 fucking health. Stealing the game. I top decked back-to-back Parhelion Patrols, which prevented lethal off his creatures, forced him into a blocking stance, and then I think I top decked like Gravitic Punch to finish the game out or something. Like, it was one of those scenarios where you're not gonna win that game 99% of the time you play that. But the times that you do win it are because you're just playing to your outs. You're not like, what's the way to minimize the damage in the short term? You're like, well, how do I win this game? And there's only a very few number of ways this can work out, and then just going for them. So it was a super, super cool game. I apologize to my opponent for top decking so hard versus him, because he got robbed on that game, quite honestly. But like, it was such a cool game to win. I walked out. That was my favorite game of the night. So that was by far my favorite game of the night. And here's the greatest part of this game, right? He scared the shit out of me because he's sitting there with 2 cards and all of his mana untapped in one of these turns as blue-black. I'm like, fuck. He's got a counterspell. And if he had counterspelled any single one of my cards in that sequence of events, I would have lost. So, but here's the greatest part of the entire night. You guys ready for this? You know what he had in his hand? He told me after the game. He had 2 Hired Poisoners in his hand. A 1/1 Death Touch creature that would have traded for my ground offense and wrecked my ground offense, but he couldn't play them because Swathcutter Giant, every time it attacks, does 1 damage to every defending creature the opponent controls before blockers. So, terrible Boros deck, playing an archetype that doesn't exist, playing mid-range Boros, but the payoff from Swathcutter Giant won me one of the deciding games, like won me the closest game I think I've played in weeks in terms of how ridiculous that game was. So I had an amazing amount of fun with that game. I was super high off the end of that because when he told me that, I'm like, I told him, you just made my night telling me that. Thanks for sharing, because the Swathcutter Giant was such a poor creature in general. But so I did end up 2-0ing him. The second game, I think I just curved out on him. Like, I had a much faster aggressive opening. The problem with this deck basically was the top end being this heavy and no way to consistently get my draws. Like, I had a game versus the Selesnya player where I curved out a 1-drop into a 2-drop into a 3-drop into a 4-drop and just crushed him. But the vast majority of times with a deck like this, you're not going to do that. It's too inconsistent with the 6s in there. There were a number of games, I think 2 out of 7, where I just had really clunky hands, but the mana to spell ratio was too good to throw away. I wasn't going to be guaranteed to play anything and lost some of those games to it. I matched into control, which is really bad from mid-range, and did that twice. But, you know, the deck was fun. I feel like it's weird because I think, like, when I'm streaming here, I try to craft the best decks for you guys most of the time. Occasionally I do something a little silly, but most of the time I'm trying to craft the best deck. It feels like when I'm in person playing, I'm like, man, I'm so tired of forcing fucking Boros and Dimir and Ravnica. Let's have some fun and do something funny or do something different. And for me, the Swathcutter Giants were super fun. So it was really fun. It was really fun. The whole night was a blast. And I think I placed 6 out of 14. I 2-0'd both of my second and my third round opponents, but losing in the first round really kicks you out of the ability to place very well. So, all right, so that was the deck. As I said, Call of the Culprit came in a number of times. Crush Contraband came in versus the guy running Disinformation Campaign. The deck was inconsistent, a bit clunky. The Swathcutter Giants were fun, but often got removed or just were too late. Light of the Legion was terrible. Command the Storms were very, very clunky, and I never drew my True Fire Captains. So a lot of the cards that I was excited about in this deck either underperformed or just didn't show up. And the Guild Mages won me 1 game. That's what it was. The second game versus my final opponent is the game I won with the Guild Mage, where I burned him out with the Guild Mage from like 8 or something, which was pretty nice. So, all right. Anyways, guys, that's going to be Paper Magic recap for today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed that. Yeah, anyways.